We at THI have covered many topics, and generally this is the expose session, and it is a expose of sorts, and it's all about money. So there's three separate stories, in fact four I think, all linked together, and it will give you a greater insight as to how money works, how it's created, and how we are robbed of it in basic terms. But if the stark reality about who pays the majority of taxes is not clear by now, this little analysis will bring it home. And analysis of tax data for the 25 richest Americans quantifies just how unfair the system has become. And by the end of 2018, the 25 were worth $1.1 trillion. That has increased rapidly since then. Now, for comparison, it would take 14.3 million ordinary American wage earners to put together to equal that same amount of wealth. The top 25, 1.1 trillion, 14.3 million Americans. Combined wealth just equals the top 25. Now, the personal federal tax bill for 2018 for the top 25 was $1.9 billion. The bill for the wage earners, $143 billion. Says it all. Poland's Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki stated that starting in December, the government will cut tax on fuel and on energy and will offer bonuses to the hardest hit households next year to counter inflation that has reached its highest level since 2001. And Morawiecki said that the so-called anti-inflation shield will cost the government some 10 billion zlotys, which is about $2.4 billion, while additional funds will come from spending cuts. Well, I never. A clever politician doing something sensible for and by the people. Something that far more richer countries seem incapable of. Now, during an interview with Emergent C, Melissa Kayume, who is a Northern Irish investor and researcher, discussed the economic impact of lockdowns and what she believes are the real reasons why governments are enforcing stringent measures across the world. Inflation is here and people need to prepare for it, she warned. And earlier this year, Sayumi released a video message lauding the success of lockdowns in ruining global economies and also livelihoods. And her video message went viral across the social media. Now, Sayumi's concerns are the economic aspects about events since the beginning of 2020, and this is the aspect where she has focused her research on. And in her interview, she explained that things started to go wrong when the United States dollar, the reserve currency, came off the gold standard. And she said in early August 1971, listen closely, France sent a warship to New York Harbor with the instructions to bring back its gold from the New York Federal Reserve Bank. Oops. And on August 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon suspended convertibility of the US dollar into gold, and that was the beginning of an era of fiat money. And this enabled the United States to live beyond its means through annual budget and trade deficits and a growing national debt. And this debt-based system that was created in truth collapsed in 2008. That was because Marduk pulled the plug on them. And then we saw the rise of the fake fiat money and also double fake money called crypto coins. Bitcoin is the largest and most well-known death currency, but it wasn't the first attempt at a digital, decentralized currency, because earlier versions of cryptocurrency existed well over a decade before Bitcoin's first line of code were written in 2009. The first lines of code written in 2009. What a coincidence that is. The cryptographer and computer scientist David Shom is often credited with laying the intellectual and technological groundwork for Bitcoin. And Shom pioneered the blinding signature protocol as a way to encrypt information and data. He created electronic money company DigiCash in 1995, which utilized his privacy-protecting formula to establish one of the first forms of digital cash. David Shom, born too. What another surprise that is. Not. Now, Sayumi said the events of 2020-2021 should have all happened around 2008. But they managed to reinflate the balloon, she said, using quantitative easing and the printing of money by central banks. And there's an ability that they can create money out of nothing and loan it to the government, who then pay them back with interest, Sayumi said. They've been doing that since the Federal Reserve started in 1913. In August 2019, there was an annual meeting of economists and bankers with a silent W at the Jackson Hole Economics Symposium, where they decided to go direct. And one suspects that that was the week we gave warnings on our show about August the 15th through 17th that month. For those of you who have been reading the transcripts, go back and check it. But looking back now, it was clear the trustee was not capable of stopping that event unfolding, or was complicit in it. Only she knows the answers, but given she refuses to answer any questions of a valid nature, one suspects she will remain as a co-conspirator until full proof is garnered to we the people. Bearing in mind, the trustee also said she had blocked the Fed from producing any currency. Well, clearly not. And in an article summary, Going Direct Reset, John Titus wrote that at Jackson Hole, BlackRock instructed the Fed. This is August 2019 now, which is a full 7 months before the trustee gave him the funds to take over the Fed, to get money into wholesale and retail hands when the next downturn arrived, which, as luck would have it, occurred less than a month later. And this was, in its essence, BlackRock's going direct plan, and it anticipates exactly what the Fed began doing quite successfully under the cover of the pandemic. Now, the downturn Titus was referring to was Sayumi's described as a crisis on the repo market. And in the following month, October 19, Event 201 was held. Event 201 was a pandemic simulation exercise hosted by the World Economic Forum for the world's elites. And the reason 2201 is so critical is because the simulation was so accurate, and there has been another simulation from the World Economic Forum in 2020, which was about cyber attacks. And the current one, Cyber Polygon, is a cyber attack on the supply chain. And she said, have a look at the three simulations because they have quite a lot of accuracy in what they're reporting. Now, Sayumi also discussed how money is created, what is real money, the difference between money and currency, hyperinflation, and how you can protect your money and prepare yourself for what is to come. She said, we have been fooled into believing that currency is money. And people have this idea that is my money in the bank. It's not, she said. Should that bank become insolvent, you will be given shares of an insolvent bank currency representing money. Now, I warned of that in the first show of 2015 on Cosmic Voice at the time, because both the UK and America installed those plans in bills on January the 1st, 2015. In the event of a crisis of the banks would shut and the people would lose their money because the money belongs to the bank. That's what it said. But nowadays, almost all money is created ex nihilo, out of thin air. And it's not backed by gold or other such physical objects, but simply entered into a ledger on computers. And the following is a summary of a series of articles written by an anonymous investment banker. And in its own words, the wizards of money will take a critical look at the mechanics of the capital and debt markets, who makes the critical decisions that drive them, and how these markets then affect everybody's lives. Exactly how does money get created? So let's talk about the actual mechanics of money creation. Well, money creation happens in two ways. First, the creation of base money, which is mostly physical currency notes created by the Federal Reserve. The second money creation process involves checking account or deposit money created by the commercial banks and which makes up most of the money supply, which is called high-powered money. The base money, also called high-powered money, is created when the Federal Reserve performs what are known as open market operations. And in this process, the Federal Reserve injects money by buying government securities, which then becomes debt owed by the government, which is all passed on to the American taxpayer by the Federal Reserve. So what are government securities? Well, they are IOUs, promises to pay back the principal plus interest at a given time, which is actually 10% per dollar, and auctioned at the open market. So where does the Federal Reserve get this money to buy the government securities? Well, it just makes it up out of thin air, because the Federal Reserve has no budget, and quite simply because it doesn't need one. It invents money wherever and whenever it needs it. And formally speaking, the Fed has added securities to its assets, which it has paid for by creating a liability on itself in the form of bank reserve balances or Federal Reserve notes. Bank reserve balances, Fed accounts for public banks, and Federal Reserve notes together form high-powered money. In fact, almost all money we come by has its basis in high-powered money that the Federal Reserve invented at some time in the past. And most of this base money is currency in the form of Federal Reserve notes. Notes also means debt. And the Federal Reserve then creates a spurious liability on its balance sheet called Federal Reserve Notes Outstanding, and in return gets an asset in the form of government securities which the public must repay through the efforts of real work or labour. And every time the Federal Reserve creates or extinguishes base money, the financial press and other mainstream media reports it as a Greenspan interest rate announcement, which is not technically correct, but it does sound more palatable than saying that the Federal Reserve just made up some money up or just made some money disappear. The Federal Open Market Committee, FOMC, and the most important function of the FOMC is to increase or decrease the money supply. And it does this by the deliberate and judicious buying and selling of securities on behalf of the 12 Federal Reserve banks. And the FOMC can, without informing the government, the public, or the banks, because its meetings are held in secret, increase or decrease the reserves of the banks. For example, if it wants the money supply to increase, it will buy government securities. If it wants the money supply to decrease, it will sell securities. Now, the Federal Reserve banks can buy an unlimited amount of securities because they do not have to pay for the securities with anything. They pay for the securities by making bookkeeping entries in the members' banks' reserve accounts. And it is reasonable to conclude that the Federal Reserve System, through its operations of the FOMC, is in a position to control, to a large extent, the economic conditions of the country. And as an example, in May 1975, the government paid out a rebate check of up to $200 to each individual who paid 1974 US income taxes. In June 1975, the government paid $50 to every recipient of Social Security insurance, supplemental security income, or railroad retirement annuity or pension payments. And the government officials paid out that money in order to increase the money supply and circulation, with the hope that these actions would increase the buying and selling of goods and services and thus create more jobs. But the one side effect of that action was that the government officials had to incur additional interest-bearing debts in order to make those payments. So what happened? Well, about July the 1st, 1975, the prime interest rates began to increase. Just like what is happening now. The Fed just bought up a load of government securities. They're now pulling it and now saying they're going to increase interest rates 3 times in the next 12 months. Between July 1st and August 8th, 1975, the prime interest rates increased about 1%, from 6.75 on July the 1st to 7.75 on August the 8th. The FOMC buys and sells securities in secret. It does not tell the public the amount of securities it buys and sells until weeks later. However, the people who understand what makes the interest rates go up or down can deduce what actions the FOMC has taken. And when the interest rates increased in July 1975, we could conclude that the FOMC offered for sale on the open market enough securities to cause the price of the securities to decline. And that act caused the interest rates to rise. And we thus witnessed a situation in which government officials incurred an extra interest-bearing debt to increase the money supply and circulation, and almost at the same time the FOMC took action to decrease the money supply. Bank credit. Once this base money is created, banks can create around 10 times this amount in checking accounts and other deposits. And they do this by making loans to the non-bank public, and a corresponding amount of checking account money is created for each new loan. So most money is created just by bankers writing some new numbers on a piece of paper, or these days entering some new bits and bytes in a computer, since money is really now just a bunch of computer records. And this means that when you go to borrow money to buy a house or a car, the money is really being created out of thin air by the bank and being credited to the checking account of the seller. The bank has a distinct advantage in all this just by being a bank. For if you can't pay the loan through your hard work, they automatically get the house, and all they did was write some numbers into the computer. From the bank's perspective, however, if you don't pay off the loan, which is actually their loan, not ours, they would have to write down their asset, which is your loan, and this would affect the earnings they report. Well, bully for them. And if lots of people did this, the bank would go belly up. Or they get clowns like Biden or other US presidents to bail them out. So you can see why they want to keep the house if you don't pay your loan. They are taking a financial risk too, albeit one created out of thin air. How is that a financial risk? For what purposes money is created? It is only bank managers and the Open Markets Committee of the Federal Reserve Board that decide how much money gets created, and importantly, for what purposes money should be created. And these decisions are all entirely closed to public input. Decisions on making new money will be based on whether a lender can repay and how much interest the lender can bring in, which is what creates bank profits. This means most money will be created to lend to people that already have lots of previously created money and lots of advantages in life. In other words, the people who already have money. Disadvantaged people will often be denied access to the money creating process, except under exploitative circumstances which are likely to see high interest rates and or ultimate possession of their assets and resources by the bank. That is what drives the class system. And I've said this before, it seems you are predetermined around 18 years of age as to how much you will or can earn. This is based on the tax code. And it's actually written into your tax code as I understand it. So they assess how much that person will earn over a lifetime, which is why you get a certain tax code and others don't. And this is why certain people will never get job promotions, because they have allocated and stated what you will earn for your life. And the only way you can change that is by running your own business and jumping out of the harvesting system. So alternatively, the more disadvantaged will have to seek money from non-bank entities that have already accumulated lots of money, and this often leads to exploitation. And what this also means is that money is not created for things most desired by society as a whole. In fact, it is often created for exactly the things that society does not want at all, a bit like war. And this includes projects that involve excessive destruction of natural resources, like logging, building power plants, mining, and so forth, because the bank realises that such projects are likely to bring back the money that will pay off the loans. And that really can be described as wanton destruction of the planet. And yet these greed-based psychopaths want us to pay for it via climate change. I think not. It is also should be interesting to note that money is almost never created for the purpose of providing public goods, such as education and healthcare, for such services will not pay the bank back. Rather, these services depend on recycled money through the tax system. And so there you have it. No taxes are used for our benefit. Hence, it's not surprising that we have reached a situation where monetary value and social value are inversely correlated. And by this I mean that a good or service with a high monetary value in private property markets generally has a low social value. And conversely, high social value goods and services generally retain a low monetary value. And this is illustrated in the example where public goods providers, such as teachers, are some of the lowest paid workers, yet currency trading is perhaps the most lucrative profession there is, and has also become one of the most socially destructive. And it is reasonable to expect that this situation would be largely reversed by taking social factors and public input into consideration at the point of money origination. And it is clear that origination of money at commercial banks is undemocratic and so encourages the creation of money or loans for many undesirable activities. But often overlooked is the unchecked power of the Fed, the creator of base money. And one of the best reminders of this power is the then Federal Reserve Governor Paul Volcker's hike in interest rates in 1979 that triggered the Latin America debt crisis. And this came at tremendous cost to the people of Latin American countries, which are now heavily controlled by Israel and the psychotic elements within the CIA. And while the activities of OPEC, the commercial banks and various dictators played a major role in laying the foundations of this crisis, the final push was decided at one committee meeting conducted behind closed doors. The FOMC meetings have never been open to public input or scrutiny. While summaries of meetings are posted almost immediately, the full transcripts of FOMC are not even available until 5 years after the event. And that's yet more evidence they have something to hide, but yet more evidence that we the people allowed them to get away with it. It is important to be concerned that the money origination process is not subject to democratic accountability, and many of these problems could be remedied if the public had more input into the decisions surrounding the origination of money, and this requires an entirely different paradigm of thinking about money than we have today. It is a very complex problem, and there are no simple answers. Well, I disagree with that. There are several simple solutions or answers that have come out of our show alone. But at the very least, it should be high on the list of topics for public debate. And in addition, once you understand the process for creating money out of thin air, you begin to see what banks and the Federal Reserves do is not so difficult after all. Now, some hope for better money is starting to materialise from local or alternative money systems such as LETS and it&apos. Now, both of them are time banking methods, which was adopted in the early 1900s. And Ithaca hours was ran in New York, and one Ithaca hours was equivalent then to $10. But I can't see that system working outside of a local community, because, like life in general, there will only be a few doers and lots of takers, and the system collapses. So time banking, we have to change the mindset of people away from greed before being able to run those systems more successfully. So what is the zero-sum game? And what is often overlooked about the monetary system, particularly by advocates of the trickle-down hypothesis, is that it is a zero-sum game because our money is entirely debt-based. The more of a positive net money balance I have, the more of a negative balance somebody else has. That's how it works. And you can put a positive balance to work earning more money while I sit around and do nothing, or go and work for more money. So the most likely situation for a positive balance person is that their positive balance will keep growing. But also in the zero-sum game, this means that somebody else's balance gets more negative. It's a lack of sharing. And the negative sum person would be unlikely to get a loan to start their own business, and so would have to go to work for someone that already has money. You see how it works? And under current wage structures and interest rates for high-risk customers, it would be difficult for many negative balance people to ever get a positive balance position no matter how hard they work. They have the added disadvantage that they can't put a positive balance to work, which then earns more money. And the most likely their balances will get more negative, which is how the system works, while the people that already have money will get more money to balance out the zero-sum game. And that confirms what I mentioned earlier about the tax code and about how much you're allowed to earn in a lifetime, being decided by jackasses in the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. But with positive money balances always earning a positive return on capital, combined with no requirement for redistribution of wealth, which is implicitly prohibited by neoliberal policy because it eases such government intervention, the results become clear. The rich will keep getting richer and the poor will keep getting poorer, and the more interest-bearing debt money you invest in developing nations, the worse, not better, the situation gets. Those that believe in the trickle-down effect will result from investment in poorer, more negative balanced countries and neighbourhoods demonstrate a very poor understanding of the monetary system. In fact, they believe in something that cannot possibly materialise and is evidenced by the consequences of investment in developing nations. And generally speaking, the zero-sum game promotes conflict. Conflicting parties need money to stand competition, in the extreme case fight a war, in order to maintain their positive balance position. And the only regulatory principle to limit the promotion of violence in all shapes and colours is the monetary monopoly's need to manage risk. And fatally, the risks taken by banks is distorted by the doctrine that the monetary monopoly as a whole may not fail. And this so-called moral hazard caused by public bailouts encourages investments in exploitation and war. And what really trickles down is violence, not wealth.